So I do want to talk about more pleasant things, and mobility and connections and connectivity is where I want to go with this. And it really has to do with the use of mobile phones, and after that, the internet uh, by people in Papua New Guinea started around about 2007. Picked up a bit later on when they moved simply from a kind of SMS or voice call system to data systems. And so there are all kinds of things going on right now. And mobile phones have been a great hit in Papua New Guinea. They've also attracted a lot of adverse commentary by people as well. One of the things that's true about mobile phones, and I found out quite early on when I was studying it, is it allows for a kind of uh, an intimacy at a distance. And there's a particular kind of practice that's caught on, or had caught on for a while in Papua New Guinea. It's not only known there; it's being found in other parts of the world too, where mobile phones became common. And it's when people will dial a number at random, and if the person who picks up on the other end is of the opposite sex, one tries to engage them in conversation. And they either hang up or yell or say, well, as a matter of fact, this is very interesting. What are you doing today? And what do you think? And so on. And I had a good friend whose name I only ever used a pseudonym with him because it wouldn't be very helpful for him. A good friend whose wife and child are living in town, and he uses the phone to communicate with his wife and child. And he's quite religious, or quite consistent to send them money for support and so on. But on the other hand, he has these really pleasant and exciting conversations at midnight or even a little bit later with a young woman who says she's 16 years old, although it turns out they're all 16 years old. For the young woman who says she's 16 years old in another part of the country. And he says, well, they have good talk. They have a good time. There's a term for that in Tokpisin. It's called gesfire, and it means kind of guessing fire, just dial at random dialing. And of course, if you get a number that works, then you want to make sure you keep this one recorded. But it attracted a lot of adverse attention in the press, and I'm sure led to some divorces as well. The relationship between people established that way is called their phone friends. So they're people that you've never laid eyes on. And well, you can now with data, I suppose. But up until that point, hadn't laid eyes on, but you could talk to them. And nobody would see them, nobody would see you. That sort of thing is completely private, but they could be like, hundreds of kilometers away, and that's okay. It can get out of hand, and it's often also it's led to marital discord if one spouse finds another spouse engaged with some unknown person on the phone. That could lead to not very happy things. Discord, divorce, and all those things are being reported and actually have happened in various areas. I met at least one couple. The husband was a pastor for one of the local churches, and his wife, and they each had phone friends, and they were each aware that they had phone friends, but they just kept them separate and say, well, that's just another part of our lives. And they didn't seem particularly excited about it, but other people were a bit skeptical. That happens as well. What the phones do help out with a lot is in practical matters, arranging transportation in Papua New Guinea, especially in the more remote areas of the country, which is, say, the ones where there's no road connection whatsoever. You either walk or you have to travel by light aircraft. And traveling by light aircraft, they don't tend to operate on fixed schedules in these outlying areas. There has to be a reason for them to come. And one of the things that's possible to do in a place that doesn't even have a radio for the aircraft is to make a phone call now, and that kind of thing. It's also possible to place orders. Sometimes it's possible to ask for help. In fact, one of the biggest things that happens is that people will contact other people, and it's now possible to transfer phone credits electronically. So people in the bush who don't actually have an income so that they can pay for their phone usage are able to do so because they will have one of their relatives in town do it. And one of the tricks they use to do this is to dial and let the phone ring for a specified number, hang up, dial, let the phone ring again. And what that means is give Charlie a call, or give me a call, or give so-and-so a call. And they'll do that. And in the course of that, they can transfer credits. So it allows this connectivity between people who are normally separated by very difficult distances on a daily basis. And since data's come on, 2 days ago, I had a conversation with a fellow that I knew was about an 8-year-old child when I was first working there. And of course, his son's just graduated from high school. We had a long talk about that and those kinds of things. And those kinds of business between friends, between relatives, and that kind of thing are really pretty good stuff. It helps a lot with the stretched kinship problem. It helps a bit with the inequality. One can now make bank transfers by telephone. So it's possible for instance, older family members, if parents or grandparents, it's now possible to actually get money to them so that they can, be a little bit more comfortable in their old age, even if their children or grandchildren aren't around to look after them. So that's a good thing. The phone with the use of social media is also used as a form of entertainment. There was a lot of anxiety about pornography on social media and so on. The same kinds of things that we find in North America about false narratives going out, conspiracy theories of various kinds of travel around. And of course, politicians are very upset about the way people talk about them on social media as well. And there are attempts that they've adopted to try to deal with this, including passing a cybercrime bill that makes it an offense to use social media or to use telecommunications for destructive purposes. They seem, however, not to have been able to actually bring any prosecutions on it yet. So although it may serve to dampen dissent, it hasn't done so far. There was one fellow that I got to know when I was living I circulated around various parts of the country to touch in person various parts of these people connected by phone networks, partly to do things like compare the length of their contact lists. Does this person have 40 contacts? Does this person have 10 contacts? Are they people only in the village, or are they people around town? Get a sense of mapping social networks. It's the equivalent of doing genealogies, except you're doing it with phones. And that's a very useful kind of thing. It also is a kind of thing that has the users sometimes worried themselves. And what they're worried about are things that we hear, and I have to say at the time they were conspiracy theories. If you've been following recent news, they're beyond the world of fantasy, and they've actually been realized. They're worried about people who might be able to explode you with your cell phone. If you have somebody who's an enemy and wants to do you harm, they might be able to do it through the phone. They can do various other kinds of things. One of the worries that people had when the cell phone towers were going up is that these would be a means of surveillance. This would be a way that the government or people that you don't like can keep track of you and where you're going. And that at the time, it seemed like a fantasy. What we now know is that fantasy was something that was shared by people who now know how to use these networks for those purposes. So it wasn't entirely wasn't entirely fantastic. But there was a bit of anxiety about the spread of this kind of telecommunication. And this fellow I know I called Toby was very, very concerned about this because he was convinced that there was a conspiracy between China and the Americans to take over the rest of the world. And they were going to do this through their cell phone networks. And most of the technicians that they saw putting up cell phone towers tended to be ethnic Chinese, at least in the area that he was in. And of course, the gear came in through the ports with Chinese shipping coming into the ports and stuff like that. So, true or not, that was the fantasy. And Toby was very, very worried about the phone. He still kind of liked it, and he had a very fancy one. Whenever a new model came out, he always bought the most recent, and that sort of thing. But he was considering it as a kind of source of darkness for him. What happened to him is at one point he was unemployed, and he was hoping that he would have some relatives who would get him a job in town, and nobody actually came through for him. And so he was left unemployed and worried about what things were going to be working, how they're going to be working for him. And after he made up his mind that he wasn't getting any help there, he decided he was a migrant from another part of the country. He decided he would strike out over the mountains to try to visit a friend of his that he knew lived in a place on the other side of the mountain range. Now, if you grew up there, you know you would never do that. You never go off by yourself into the mountains. And if you haven't been there, and he hadn't been there, if you hadn't been there, you might not know that there's no drinkable water up in the mountains because it all flows into the limestone. It all disappears underground. So there's lots of rain. And unless you wring out moss, you don't have anything to drink. It's very cold. You can freeze to death up there, especially at night, especially in the rain. Well, this guy went up and he got to a certain point where he couldn't go any further. He was soaked. His clothes were soaked to the bone. And he found himself lying down in the forest. And he only awakened when he realized that wild dogs, it's the equivalent of dingoes, I suppose, in Papua New Guinea, that wild mountain dogs were sniffing around him. And he tried to shoo them away, but even then he didn't have much energy for that. Fortunately, there was a family that were headed in the same direction and passed by the track, and they saw him on the side of the road. And when they saw him, first thing they did was to revive him. The second thing they did is they found a spot where they could get cell phone connection, and they called a relative of theirs and said, "Here's this fellow. He's come from such and such a village. He's lost here up in the mountains. Can you find someone to help him?" And people patched together a network of calls of somebody who knew somebody who lived in that direction, and maybe 3 or 4 villages along, and found, pardon me, my voice is gone, and found somebody. My voice is restored almost, and found somebody who was an in-law of his, and they organized a rescue team and went and brought him back. So the moral of that story for him was, it might be true that you're under surveillance with mobile phones and you don't, can't get away with anything, that kind of stuff, but you'll never be lost. If you've got a mobile phone, they'll find you. They'll find you, and they'll find you when you want them to. So that was a happy ending for his story. I continued my work trying to figure out trying to figure out what the effects of mobile phone networks were at the cutting edges of the network because they were just being expanded. And that was around about 2015. And what happened while I was in there, this is probably about the 8th trip back to Telefomin now. What happened is that Telefomin was caught in a drought, and then the El Nino drought of 2015. In 2016 had impacted the country. It had shut down the mine at Tabubil. The town of Tabubil itself was cut off because the water level in the Fly River was too low for shipping to reach the port. So the food supplies were not coming through to the town. the hydroelectricity that they depended upon for the town's own system was unavailable. The water level was too low. They couldn't get fuel supplies in. The town, you had a town of about 20,000 people all of a sudden that was cut off, right? Very bad. The mine itself was closed down. They shut down the mine for the duration. And people had to go back home. They were told to go back home. We can't support you in town. Some people chose to stay anyway. They were permitted to stay if they had families in the area, but otherwise they were quote unquote evacuated. They were repatriated, sent back to their homelands. This had an effect that was not all that wonderful in the places they were sent to, because they were often sent back to the places that had failing gardens and shortage of water supplies. And this certainly happened in Telefomin. So it increased the hardship for people in rural areas, often to have these people brought back. One of the things that was useful for the mobile phones, and this is the thing that both led me to drop the project that I was on and to do something else, is in a situation like rural drought where the communications are so bad, what you really need is information about the state of airstrips, about the state of the gardens, the state of the water supply, the health situation, where people are congregating, where they're not congregating, if there's local famine, where is it? And in order to organize relief supplies, you have to prioritize these things. And so working together with Bryant Allen and Mike Burke, two colleagues who work on environmental systems in Papua New Guinea, and several other people, it's a very large network. What we did was drought reporting. So we get information into an area that was centrally organizing this stuff to coordinate relief efforts across the country during the drought, and to make sure that even the places at the end of the line weren't left out, that people who got help, people who needed help got the help. And not everybody did, but the system actually worked much better, absolutely much better than it would have without the mobile phone. If there's no other justification for the mobile phone or for mobile phone use in that part of the world, I think that would be it. Because when being disconnected means you're in real trouble, it's a help, and it's the kind of thing you need. So I thought that was a welcome kind of thing, and I'm very happy to see it there.